As soon as a person starts playing psychological games with you, they instantly lose their value. For 2 years I offered my financial strategies to Alissa's elite investment fund and delivered 99 pitches, resulting in 99 public rejections because she thought I was just a fanatical beggar craving her approval. While her protege Christian smirked arrogantly and called my unique algorithms garbage, as they believed they had complete control over me. But a Sigma never acts without an ulterior motive. Which is why 3 days ago I casually breached Alissa's hidden servers and uncovered her ultimate secret, discovering she was secretly obsessed with my mind and had integrated all 99 of my rejected projects into her system, reveling in the process of forcing a genius to beg for a partnership just to turn me into her slave on the 100th attempt. So upon learning of her hypocritical game I felt no resentment but only a chilling irony, leading me to secretly sign a contract with a massive European conglomerate and prepare my exit documents, deciding to vanish from her life forever but needing to officially close the current cycle first. So when Alissa celebrated her promotion to head of the fund that evening I arrived uninvited, hearing the familiar voices of her entourage discussing my persona at the doors of the private hall, as they laughed and asked why Kai was late and if he would bring the 100th project, and told Alissa she should finally accept it, with Alissa replying with absolute confidence that I was too dependent on her resources and wouldn't go anywhere, making me think to myself that there would be no next time and the game she played had reached its finale. And the moment I crossed the threshold all conversations in the room instantly ceased, as they faked smiles and changed the subject with the speed of frightened rats, while Alissa continued playing the Ice Queen and held her mask perfectly even though I knew the truth. Whereas before I would have rushed to her with a new report, I now simply sat in the corner checking my phone, knowing the entire evening was a farce and I was only waiting for the moment to present my final gift, as my absolute calmness and blatant disregard for her presence slowly began to erode her confidence. And when the gift-giving ceremony ended I slowly rose from my seat, placing a miniature calendar with exactly 30 pages right in front of her, calmly telling her to remove 1 page every day from now on and that a surprise awaited her on the 30th day, prompting her entourage to immediately assume this was a countdown to my 100th anniversary pitch, causing the corners of her lips to twitch as she believed her plan was working and I was on the verge of capitulation. But they were all wrong, since the 30th day marked my complete liquidation from her digital and physical world. So before leaving I decided to force her to cement her lies publicly by asking her to describe her ideal business partner. But her answer was cut short when Christian entered the hall carrying an expensive gift wrapped in gold, drawing Alissa's gaze as she tapped her fingers on the table for show. And she coldly declared that her ideal partner is someone predictable and loyal to the system who follows her conditions without unnecessary ambition, directing those words at me in an attempt to wound my pride in front of the entire board of directors. And she spent the rest of the evening ostentatiously drawing Christian closer to the fund's affairs to create an illusion of his triumph, forcing me to step into the restroom to wash away the suffocating atmosphere of corporate hypocrisy, knowing that Christian was just her puppet to provoke my jealousy but realizing the game had gone too far, when Christian followed me inside to cement his supposed superiority with a dose of insults, spitting out that I had chased a contract for 2 years and had no chances because I was just cheap trash. Yet I didn't bother to answer and simply looked at the door behind his back, where Alissa was standing, having heard every word from her protege while keeping her face made of stone. And instead of defending justice she theatrically draped her coat over Christian and claimed there was a draft in the hallway, leaving together fully confident in my crushing moral defeat because arrogance strips people of their reason. But I tossed the incident from my mind as easily as a used towel, since my real contract was already waiting for me, as a storm raged outside and all the premium cars belonging to Alissa's fund had already departed, leaving me completely alone in the cold night while a freezing flame of imminent vendetta burned brightly inside me. And I returned to my tech sector at 2 in the morning with the final purge ahead of me, knowing I no longer needed this residential block across from Alissa's office because the real estate sale was complete. So I erased all traces of my presence here and destroyed the hard drives containing my old work, ensuring that tomorrow Alissa will see the new owner of my apartment and my exit from her life has truly begun. Meaning the clock is ticking, Alissa, and your 30-day countdown has started, because money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. The morning of a new day arrives as an elite real estate broker inspects my empty apartments. The deal is closed and I am completely severing all physical ties to this place. When the door across the hall opened, Alissa was about to leave but froze upon seeing a stranger in my home. A momentary paranoia flashed in her eyes as my status as an obedient shadow began to slip away. So I indifferently lied that she was a family lawyer because I did not need any unnecessary questions. Upon exiting the building she blocked my path and ordered me to get into her car, and we spent the entire drive to the venture capital center in absolute chilling silence, as she was accustomed to my constant analytical stream of words making my silence terrify her. I stepped out at the main office throwing a dry and short thank you without a single glance back, where a planned strike awaited me in the conglomerate's lobby as Christian had moved to open information warfare, leaking false compromising information about my past projects onto all internal servers, and framing my 2 years of work as the obsessive delusions of an incompetent parasite. Knowing public humiliation is the favorite weapon of the weak elite, but a Sigma cannot be destroyed by the opinions of others. So I approached the central terminal with absolute terrifying calmness. And with a single keystroke I erased their entire filthy presentation from the main network node, prompting Christian to step out of the crowd and loudly ask if I was ready to admit my complete defeat. While Alissa watched silently expecting me to break and crawl to her for protection. But I raised my hand and locked my gaze on the audience as my voice rang out like a final verdict, loudly announcing that on December 3rd at 9 in the morning my 100th and final master pitch would take place in the central hall. Adding that I was inviting the entire board of directors to witness something that would forever change this market. Letting them believe this would be my 100th attempt to beg Alissa for a contract. The weekend arrived with the conglomerate's private corporate mixer acting as a place of false sincerity and expensive masks. Where I sat alone in the shadows completely invisible to their drunken revelry knowing my resignation letter was already on the president's desk. But for the first time in her life Alissa attended such an ordinary event because she came looking for me. As the board of directors launched a brutal psychological asset elimination game called Truth or Risk. Resulting in 7 rounds of intense pressure where the system methodically cut off weak players one by one. Until the 8th round when Alissa made a strategic mistake and lost causing the room to erupt in shouts. With a harsh penalty condition requiring an intimate gesture or a kiss with any present man within 3 minutes. And she looked at me hoping to provoke a Sigma into showing jealousy or weakness. Before pointedly choosing Christian and ordering the complete shutdown of the hall's emergency lighting. Bringing total darkness for 3 minutes which was a time of false hopes for her parasite. But when the lights flashed back on Alissa was sitting in her original spot meaning nothing had happened between her and Christian. Leaving Christian standing pale as he realized he had once again been used as a cheap tool for someone else's game. Then a new round began and my digital dice yielded the worst result in the game shifting the room's attention to me. As they waited for me to follow the rules and choose Alissa to publicly confess my loyalty to her. But a Sigma never plays by someone else's rules so I completely ignored her gaze. Preferring the system's maximum penalty condition of pure liquidation over a humiliating choice. Drinking the entire volume without a single sign of weakness or hesitation proving my total autonomy of mind. Causing Alissa's face to twist in fury because I had publicly trampled her scenario by preferring poison over her company. So the game was over and I left this gathering of bankrupts leaving them in utter confusion. Only to be caught on the stairs by a furious Christian whose eyes burned with the fear of his power slipping away. As he grabbed my shoulder shouting that I would be destroyed at the board of directors after today. Knowing physical contact is the domain of weak amateurs I made one calculated shift and sent the parasite tumbling down. Where he broke a bone during the fall making his carelessness cost him his mobility before the main audit day. Leading Christian to be rushed to the conglomerate's private clinic with Alissa accompanying him personally. Where the doctor announced there was only one surgeon forcing a choice of operation priority and making Alissa instinctively look at me. But I was only there to close the company's medical insurance and my gaze was entirely dead to her. So she chose him to punish me with her decision but the noose of vendetta had finally tightened completely because money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. I regained consciousness a day after the fall and immediately checked my systems to ensure my legs were fully functional. As my family instantly blocked any attempts by the press to blow up the scandal by transferring me to the top floor VIP apartments. And ironically Christian was placed directly opposite me because Alissa personally coordinated his hospitalization. So the next 10 days turned into a cheap theatrical performance as she ostentatiously cared for him under my gaze. Cooking for him and bringing rare delicacies to create an illusion of absolute closeness. But a Sigma doesn't watch cheap plays so I only focused on the movement charts of European funds. And every time her fake laugh got too loud I simply ordered the heavy door of my ward to be closed. Which shattered her scenario because she understood her emotional blackmail was hitting an empty void. And on the day of discharge we ran into each other in the underground parking lot where Christian sat pale and angry in a wheelchair. Prompting the parasite to weakly try a sarcastic remark by offering to give the cripple a ride home but I didn't even lift my eyelids. So my car pulled away leaving them in a cloud of premium exhaust fumes. But upon returning to the residential complex we found ourselves in the same confined space of the elevator once again. Where she walked behind me and deliberately slowed her pace to prolong this forced proximity. When right at my door my support slipped from my hand due to physical weakness from the injury. Causing her to instinctively flinch toward me out of a desire to help and break my cold barrier. But her pride took over again and she pulled her hand back at the last moment pretending to just fix her shoe. So I silently picked up the item myself because her childish manipulations only provoked my cold contempt. Soon the time for final testing arrived and due to my injury I was given a seat in the front row right before the professor. Then Alissa brought Christian into the hall and ostentatiously seated him at the adjacent desk across the aisle. And when the exam began I had total concentration as my mind worked at maximum speed. But Christian waited for the professor to turn away and precisely threw a crumpled cheat sheet onto my desk. Which was a cheap setup and the most primitive way to eliminate a competitor before European grant distributions. Causing the professor to react instantly as she approached and coldly announced the cancellation of my results. So I calmly stood up and demanded to pull the security camera recordings while looking her dead in the eye. But Christian had calculated this move because the building had just suffered a local power grid failure shutting down the cameras. Making him believe he had caught me in a perfect trap with no way out. and leaving Alissa as the only independent witness who was sitting next to Christian and saw the whole incident, forcing her to choose between admitting her protege's guilt or publicly destroying my academic reputation. And her face turned to cold stone as she firmly lied to the professor that Christian didn't throw the paper and she saw me using it myself. Which was an official verdict accusing me not just of cheating but also of slandering a colleague. And I felt the room turn into an ice cave, but inside me there was only an absolute void. So Alissa ran after me into the empty corridor as her composure shattered and panic filled her eyes at my silence. Screaming that she knew Christian was guilty but he was too thin-skinned to endure the shame. Feverishly continuing that she would compensate me later because it was just one exam and the points could be recovered. But I smoothly pulled my hand back out of her reach and asked in a whisper of absolute frost how she planned to compensate for betrayal and if she thought my skin was made of stone. Because she thought I would argue and prove the truth or beg her to change her testimony. But I simply told her over my shoulder to keep tearing pages off the calendar and wait for the 30th day. And 2 days before the finale I signed the final sales contract for my apartments across from her windows. Beginning the complete liquidation of the past because all material reminders of those 2 years of illusion had to burn. Destroying the beautifully embroidered scarf I had created for her fund's milestone and deleting archives of old joint projects. Turning every line of code written for her approval into faceless gray dust. Sending everything to the trash bin and cold-bloodedly liquidating my old identity. While she saw the smoke but was too afraid to approach because my clearing of space evoked a primal fear in her. Then on the morning of the final day our private board of directors chat exploded with hundreds of notifications. Because I had never left the chat and they didn't know I could see all their morning commotion while sitting at the airport terminal. Seeing Alissa write to her allies that today I would surrender and she would choose my project to make it their main intellectual property. As she sincerely believed her betrayal at the exam would force me to crawl for a contract to save my career. Showing an absurd arrogance by trampling my loyalty and setting me up yet still expecting mutual love. So if this is her understanding of partnership, the system will not serve it and I permanently left their network. As my flight to Milan prepares for takeoff because the 30th day has arrived and your calendar is empty, Alissa, so remember that money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. The day of the 100th pitch arrived and the entire elite of the conglomerate gathered in the square expecting my public submission. As Alissa stood in the center ready to accept my capitulation and take my algorithms forever. But at exactly 9 o'clock the time for my true answer arrived. Sending a simulacrum of a white storm falling from the sky as 10,000 cards filled the entire space of the plaza. Making people rush to catch them expecting to see love confessions or pleas for a contract. But the text on the cards read that Kai will never return to Alissa's system. And in that moment her illusion of control shattered into tiny fragments as panic began. Meaning the entire conglomerate instantly learned of my complete exit from her game, which delivered a crushing blow to her ego. So she dropped her mask of indifference and ran toward my residential block driven by a wild fear of irreversibility. And burst inside only to find the room greeting her with a chilling emptiness. With not a single one of my belongings left while a strange man stood on the threshold with his luggage. And the agent dryly confirmed that Kai liquidated this asset 3 days ago and erased everything. Causing her to collapse onto the floor right in the hallway as her world rapidly shrank to the size of this empty room. Because all my digital numbers, hidden communication channels and personal accounts showed one status, which was a complete block. And at that moment her phone exploded with a call from the fund's management signaling that a new phase of the loop had activated. As it turned out, Christian and her fund were officially accused of document forgery and false testimony at the exam. Because the chief independent auditor of the conglomerate personally initiated an investigation and Alissa's lie was exposed. Stating coldly that she gave false testimony against Kai, and because of her blind pride their international rating was destroyed. Forcing Alissa to publicly admit her protege's guilt in order to save the fund from an instant license revocation. Meaning Christian was disgracefully expelled from the industry forever and blacklisted as the parasite returned to the bottom. And while they drowned in the ruins of their reputational crisis, my plane entered Italian airspace. Where Milan greeted me with the cold clean air of freedom since the old cycle was officially closed. Allowing me to pass verification at the European conglomerate without issue and take the position of lead risk manager. And on my very first day at the new location I was met by Sylvia, the top analyst of the Milan hub. Whose pragmatic mind and high intelligence were perfectly suited for building my new structure. So instead of modest housing I acquired a premium autonomous penthouse right next to the financial center. And we worked together creating new algorithms for global liquidity distribution as everything proceeded on schedule. While reports arrived from China indicating that Alissa's fund had lost 60% of its market value due to the scandal. And she tried to find my new contacts through old colleagues, but a sigma leaves no traces for X's. Meaning my capital grew exponentially as it was fueled by European grants. A month passed and my new life was filled with perfect mathematical harmony and success. As Sylvia saw me not just as a colleague but as a sovereign of the new digital era, making our closeness inevitable. But the storm from the past caught up with me even here when Alissa appeared at the terrace entrance. Having spent millions and 3 weeks of her life to track me down in Italy to beg for mercy. As she aggressively stepped into the light and hissed, demanding to know who this foreigner was and if I traded her in just a couple of weeks. Yet I continued my dinner with the absolute and annihilating cold-bloodedness of a Sigma because her fury was powerless. Calmly replying that this is Sylvia, my new strategic partner, and her presence here violates the privacy of our deal. Leaving her unable to believe that her greatness no longer held any power over me and she had become a nobody. And in an attempt to make a scene, she started a scuffle with Sylvia, forcing the restaurant administration to immediately call the police. Which led this local incident to the Milan Carabinieri department, acting as the finale of a false drama, where the officer turned to me as the main witness and asked who started the aggression. And without a second of hesitation I pointed straight at Alissa, because lies must be punished by their own methods. Making her freeze as she realized the depth of the karmic irony, since she betrayed me at the exam and now I was returning the debt. So I officially declared that this woman was a stalker violating my sovereign rights, and the case was closed. Detaining Alissa for 48 hours for violating public order and aggression which trampled her pride into dust. Another month passed and my life was finally cleansed of toxic ghosts from the past as I moved towards billion-dollar funds. But after her release she didn't leave and staged a public stunt trying to win me back with roses and apologies. But for a Sigma, her new 99 attempts were just cheap comedic content, so I walked past without noticing her existence. And on the weekend we went to a private country summit by the lake while my new empire grew stronger by the hour. Meaning the fifth phase of the loop has reached its finale and I cut her out of the system without a single shot, because money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. Time passed, changing the seasons, but the algorithms of my life remained unchanged. While Alissa turned into an obsessive shadow appearing within a 20-meter radius every few days. And her new attempts to regain my attention from the 1st to the 30th were constantly recorded by the AI security system. Meaning every time she tried to approach, my security team cold-bloodedly blocked her under legal pretexts. As my social circle grew I ostentatiously accepted the attention of other successful women right before her eyes. Forcing her to watch as my presence became the absolute center of a new international structure. When summer arrived the number of her futile attempts reached 50, so I delivered the next strike. By publicly introducing my new companion, which became the point of mental default for Alissa. Leaving her to nights of disappointment where she drowned her shattered pride in expensive alcohol before returning to an empty apartment. And every day she woke up in a chilling vacuum, fully realizing the massive scale of her loss. But 2 months later I concluded those temporary relationships calmly and pragmatically by mutual agreement. And upon learning of my breakup she came running back trying to portray sympathy and understanding. So I dryly told her that her acting skills are no longer valued in my market. Adding that she should return to China to her Christian because they perfectly match each other at the bottom level. Leaving her without options, so she decided to bet everything on a 100th and final attempt. Spending 2 days building a giant domino structure that recreated our very first pitch. And utilizing all her connections to lure me into this garden to bring us back to the past. At 9 in the evening everything was ready for her grand reconciliation, but a Sigma never attends someone else's show. So the garden remained empty and her feverish expectations began to turn into chilling horror. Because time ran out, causing the domino structure to collapse on its own and launch an automatic cycle. Until the last tile fell, igniting the final torches, but instead of triumph sheer chaos began. And at that exact moment her phone vibrated with a call from a hidden international number. Which she answered with a frantic hope in her voice, expecting to hear words of forgiveness. But I calmly told her that I heard she set up the 100th presentation while I had been back in China for 3 days. And my voice from the speaker definitively destroyed the last remnants of her cognitive stability. So I issued 2 final system warnings without changing my icy tone, starting by telling her there is a dry wind outside and she should put out her candles before her fund burns to the ground. And secondly that I have a new international contract and a new companion named Monica, meaning her game is truly over. Causing her fingers to unspool as the phone fell into the fire, severing our last connection forever. As the dry winter wind instantly fanned the flames, turning the entire elite academy garden into a fiery trap. Yet she made no attempt to run and was only saved by emergency services pulling her from the suffocating smoke at the last moment. Which sparked an international scandal as the university filed a colossal lawsuit and made Alissa the prime suspect in the arson. Leading the European police to detain her, turning her attempt to stage a show into a real criminal prosecution. And although her family mobilized all hidden reserves and funds to save her, the international courts remained unyielding. Forcing the last liquid assets of her empire to be spent covering fines and legal fees, resulting in a complete default. So the outcome of her arrogance was 6 months of imprisonment in a European jail, followed by lifelong deportation. And half a year later she was delivered to the plain stairs for forced return to her homeland without money or status. Returning to where it all began, but finding that the world around her had changed forever. Because no one came to meet the former heiress of $1 billion fund, as she had become a ghost of the past. And at that exact moment I was walking out of the main office of our newly merged conglomerate. Since my 3 years of European expansion had brought me absolute independence and the highest industry awards. With Monica beside me as a woman who valued strategic calculation over cheap manipulation. And our gazes crossed for a fraction of a second through the crowd in a chance encounter between 2 former partners. So I politely nodded to her like an absolute stranger and closed the armored door. Letting her former pride and power dissolve into that crowd as the Vendetta Loop completed its full rotation. while our new system reached a planetary level of autonomy, meaning we had become the very architecture of the market itself, leaving her standing on the sidelines of someone else's triumph with the full realization that she destroyed her own great future. And her name was forever erased from the elite registries as she received her final margin call. Because for 2 years she considered me her intellectual property, but now my shadow controls her former assets. Meaning the cycle is completely finished and the architecture of the new empire is monolithic and protected from any betrayals. So the 6th phase is completed and our game has reached its finale, because money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. Returning to my homeland was not an act of nostalgia but a final inspection of my new domains. As 3 years in Europe transformed me from a talented exile into a sovereign of global venture capital. Because my loop system already controlled all key financial flows in the Asian region. And the Vendetta automation conglomerate entered the domestic market without noise but with absolute power. While on the other end of the city Alissa was getting used to her new grey reality. Since after her deportation from Europe and her family's bankruptcy, her name was forever erased from the lists of the highest elite. And every day the city reminded her of the price of her former arrogance, because I was on every screen, forcing her to see the man whose loyalty she once valued at 0%. But pity is a code defect, so there is no place in my system to forgive those who have betrayed even once. With Monica standing by my side providing the perfect analytical balance because she valued power over illusions. Then an alarm signaled that the hidden remnants of the old syndicate attempted to attack our internal gateways. As the surviving allies of Alissa's family believed they could steal the early prototypes of my AI core, failing to understand that any hacking attempt they made was simply a trigger for their complete self-destruction. So the loop didn't just block their trail but initiated a reverse buyout of their debt obligations. And within 3 minutes the entire hidden accounting of the Obsidian Cartel was leaked to an international audit, liquidating their financial independence before they even had a chance to close their terminals. As they received a forced bankruptcy notice, meaning another redundant element of the system was erased. Because a Sigma never looks back at defeated enemies and your time expired the moment you chose the side of deceit. That evening Alissa walked home wrapping herself in an old coat, realizing she no longer even had the right to harbor ambitions. And she finally understood that her entire past life was just a temporary concession on my part. As arrogance had blinded her for 2 years, but now reality forced her to look at the world from absolute poverty. A new morning brought new scales of expansion as our structure evolved into a true monolith. So we no longer depended on local crises or political intrigues because we were writing the rules of the game ourselves. Forcing Alissa's former partners to line up and beg for even a brief audience. But traitors and their accomplices do not get a second chance, they only receive total disregard. As the Asian logistics sector completely transitioned under our direct control, making the scale planetary. And all the hidden patents and resources of the old regime were finally digested by my AI system. While Alissa read the news about the growth of our conglomerate, realizing her absolute insignificance in this clash of titans. Becoming nothing more than a grain of sand that the system discarded on the roadside out of uselessness. And by noon the remnants of the Obsidian Cartel capitulated by requesting a direct line of communication with me. So I accepted the call, and the face of a man who only yesterday considered himself an untouchable elite player appeared on the screen. Asking through gritted teeth what I wanted and how much money it would take to stop this annihilation. But I didn't bother naming numbers because a Sigma does not negotiate with those standing on the edge of the abyss. Quietly replying that I didn't need their money but would take their entire infrastructure at the cost of their total default. Making it clear this was not a deal offer but an ultimatum, leaving no path for retreat. And I cut the connection without waiting for an answer to let their own fear complete the rest of my strategy. As my AI core fully adapted to the scale of the global market and eliminated any external risks. Allowing the storm to subside and give way to a cold, clear morning of a new economic reality. So the 7th phase of our expansion entered its final stage and our empire controlled everything. Meanwhile Alissa returned to the building of her former company, driven by the foolish hope of getting a job there as a simple analyst. But the guards wouldn't even let her on the doorstep because her name had been officially blacklisted across the entire industry. And she stared at my portrait inside the lobby, realizing that this throne could have once belonged to her by right of loyalty. But her false pride made her a beggar, and now she is merely a random passerby in my world. Because my presence in this market was no longer a secret, so the time had come to declare myself to the whole world. Holding a folder that contained the fate of hundreds of directors who dared to question my calculations. As Monica told me with a calm smile that the car was ready and the global stock exchanges were waiting for my official statement. And I just nodded because emotions are a defect for the weak, and for a Sigma only the final result matters. So we drove onto the global arena, leaving behind the ruins of those who underestimated the shadow of a humble secretary. Proving that everyone who tried to use me as a tool eventually became fuel for my massive growth. The 7th phase of the loop has reached its finale, but the global cycle of absolute dominance is just beginning its course, so remember that money can be returned but time and loyalty are gone forever. The World Economic Summit is the point where the final verdict for the entire global industry is delivered. And as my motorcade stopped at the main entrance, I walked in not as a participant but as the chief regulator. Making those who refused to let me step foot in their regional offices 3 years ago desperately seek a single second of my gaze. But a Sigma does not trade his time for routine handshakes because my true goal was much higher. So when I stepped onto the stage, the entire hall froze as an absolute and terrifying silence of a dead zone descended. Knowing I didn't prepare any beautiful presentations and simply displayed the real architecture of the new world order on the screens. Showing that the loop system had completed the integration of all shadow assets and the entire global financial zone was now locked onto my server. Executing an instant and quiet liquidation of the old monopolies without any theatrics or a single warning. Proving that power is not measured by the volume of your statements but by the perfect mathematical precision of your algorithms. And during my 3 minutes of silence on the stage, 30 of the largest funds of the old regime ceased to exist. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Alissa was finishing her night shift for mere pennies. As the former heiress of a multi-billion-dollar empire now counted pennies just to pay for a cold room. And every time she connected to the network, the world reminded her of her greatest and irreparable stupidity, forcing her to stare at my chilling calmness while remembering how easily she threw my projects into the shredder. Realizing that arrogance satisfied her ego for a second but stripped her of a future forever. Because the most terrifying punishment is not the walls of a prison but the knowledge that you destroyed your perfect life all by yourself. Yet I didn't need their ovations since my strategy had already proven its absolute and monolithic righteousness. And behind the closed doors of the summit, all processes were switched to a mode of 100% autonomy. As Monica brought the final protocols confirming that all strategic nodes of the planet had officially transitioned under the Vendetta brand. Placing the final period in this long multi-move game with complete cold-bloodedness. With the new morning erasing the remnants of the old world and permanently changing the map of global influence. Meaning our structure no longer depended on external laws or regulators or any political intrigues. Because we had become the law itself, acting as the very operating system by which this world functions. While those who helped my enemies organize setups and leak compromising material simply dissolved into obscurity. Allowing the system to automatically purge itself of parasites so that everyone received exactly what they deserved through their choices. Proving that the quality of your life is always determined by the quality of your decisions in the critical moment of betrayal. And my icy calculation protected me from the emotions that ultimately destroyed the empires of my enemies. As Alissa finally turned into a faceless ghost of the past, becoming nothing more than a pathetic witness to someone else's triumph. Because her time stopped on the very day she chose to lie, while mine flowed at the speed of light to bring me billions. And the AI core of the loop reached a planetary level of self-learning, eliminating any possibility of internal failures. Completing the architecture of the new empire and ensuring all processes worked with 100% accuracy. So by my side remained only the few who proved their worth through actions rather than fake contracts. As 2 years of humiliation and 99 public rejections were fully compensated by my absolute triumph. And the memory of the days when I was considered a worthless pawn made me utterly invulnerable to any external strikes. Proving our scale no longer had physical or legal boundaries and our expansion had become absolute. Allowing me to look at the horizon where the dark water met the clear sky and know that the system was perfect. Because every cent stolen from me in the past returned to me in the form of total power over this market. As we built a monolith on the ruins of those who considered a shadow genius to be ordinary disposable material. While Alissa rode to her empty suburban barracks, completely erased from the registries of the living industry leaders. Becoming an eternal witness to my greatness and a person with no future, no status, and not the slightest hope. Meaning the finale of this grand game was predetermined on the very first day of my dismissal. Because a Sigma never takes revenge for fleeting emotions but simply establishes a flawless order within the system. So my cycle of vengeance is completely finished, and this loop will never loosen around their necks again. As the AI core registered the eternal stable status of the system across the globe, reading status overlord. Ensuring that every second of my new life now worked exclusively to multiply my total dominance. And this world now lived entirely by my laws, breathing in strict accordance with my financial algorithms. As the era of the fake elite and ungrateful brothers and hypocritical partners was left forever at the very bottom of this history. For we took this crown by the right of supreme strategic intellect and the harsh pragmatism of a Sigma. Your 30-day cycle is over, Alissa, and the loop has tightened permanently. Because money can be recovered but time and loyalty are gone forever, meaning our game is completely finished.